"Sorry, ma'am, but your name isn't on the guest list." Those words spoken by the young guard standing at the main gate of Fort Bragg hit me like a bullet through the chest, not because of the rejection, but because of its cruel familiarity. I tightened my grip on my cap, trying to stay calm. The April morning sun poured down on the white columns lining the entrance where families of soldiers streamed through, all, called by name, welcomed, invited in. All except me. I stood there wearing a dark coat over the military uniform beneath. My medals and rank were carefully hidden as I had grown accustomed to hiding myself for over a decade. "I'm Amelia Carter," I said evenly. "Captain Luke Carter's sister. Family." The young soldier bent down to check the list again. Luke's name was there along with my parents William and Evelyn Carter and Luke's wife Sarah. But not me. Never me. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter. I'll have to ask you to move away from the checkpoint area." In the distance, I saw my family approaching. My father, retired Colonel William Carter, in his old, impeccably pressed dress uniform. My mother, elegant as always, clutching a small handbag befitting military protocol. Luke walked between them, tall, confident, his medals gleaming on his chest under the morning sun. He caught sight of me standing there, and he stopped. "What's the matter?" Amelia Luke asked, but not with concern. His lips curled into that familiar smile, the one he'd used since childhood, to remind me I was always an outsider in the Carter family. "My name's not on the guest list," I replied. He shrugged. "Must be some clerical error. You know how those desk jockeys mess things up." Then he turned to our parents, as if I didn't exist, and they continued through the gate. The young guard stepped closer. "Ma'am, please move out of the security area." I was prepared for every scenario, even being ignored, but I didn't expect that moment to hurt so much. Despite my general's rank, despite commanding dozens of classified operations in the eyes of my family, I was still just a forgettable sister. I was about to speak to pull out my high-level military ID, but at that moment a black SUV pulled up to the gate. The door opened. Major General Scott Langford, my direct commander, stepped out with a presence that made every guard snap to attention. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice ringing sharp as steel. "Sir, this guest isn't on the list." Langford didn't let him finish. "She's not a guest." He stepped beside me, a faint smile on his face. "Welcome, General Amelia Carter." The guard blinked, his mouth opening to say something, then froze. His skeptical gaze turned to shock, then clear embarrassment. I'm sorry, General Carter. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." Langford nodded, then looked at me with quiet satisfaction. "Let's go, General. There are people waiting for you inside." I gave a slight nod, saying nothing. As we walked through the gate, I glanced to my right, where my parents were taking their seats in the front row, and Luke turned back, hearing the murmurs from the audience. His eyes landed on me, the person he'd dismissed as a nuisance just moments before. That look, I'll never forget it. I am Amelia Carter. 34 years old. General in the United States Army assigned to strategic intelligence. I've commanded over 27 multinational operations, prevented thousands of casualties, and dismantled international terrorist networks. But to my family, I'm just the daughter who works in an office. No one in my family ever knew my true rank. I didn't tell them because I wasn't allowed to. National security clearance is a stricter law than familial bonds. My story isn't just a military one. It's the story of those who are underestimated, those who carry burdens their loved ones never see, never understand. If you've ever been overlooked, forgotten, leave a comment below. I want to know how you overcame it, or how you're still pushing through. That ceremony would stretch on for hours. I knew my part was yet to come, but I also knew the truth in the end could not be hidden forever. I once thought I didn't need recognition, that what I did was for my country, not for applause. But standing at that gate, I realize sometimes what we need most is to be seen by the ones we love most. And this ceremony this day meant to honor my brother would be a turning point. Not just for me, but for the entire Carter family. I still keep the habit of waking early even on my rare days off. Every morning I sit by the window of my small Arlington apartment drinking black coffee, silently watching the city come to life. Outside, the world buzzes with traffic, unaware that the woman in the wool cardigan once commanded dozens of operations the press could never report. On the table next to my coffee is an embossed invitation Silver Star ceremony for Captain Luke Carter, Fort Bragg. Below it, family should be present. Mom, no greeting, no full signature, no space to RSVP. Because to them I was always the extra one, even as a general. I was born into a pure military family, if you can call it that. My father, William Carter, was a decorated Army officer who served in the Gulf and the Balkans. Every photo in our home was living proof of his storied career, from his West Point diploma in the living room to his dress uniform in a glass case with rows of medals arranged like a private language. I was the eldest, but from a young age I learned that daughter was just a lesser version of expectation. Luke, my younger brother by 2 years, declared as soon as he could talk, "I'll be like Dad." A few push-ups in the living room, and Dad would clap, like Luke had saved the world. Me. I won a state science award at 15, but Dad only asked was anyone on the panel a soldier. My mother, Evelyn, was kind but traditional. To her, the ideal daughter married young, cooked well, and showed up on time to events looking polished. I remember walking into the living room in my first military uniform after basic training. She glanced at me and said, "Not everyone's cut out for a uniform, dear." I didn't choose intelligence to defy them. Honestly, I chose it because I was captivated by map signals and the quiet game of strategy more than anything else. When people talk about war, they mention trenches, bombs, gunfire. I saw something else. Networks of information gaps in systems, decisions that could bury hundreds of lives. I didn't want to just be a soldier. I wanted to understand war and change it. But the night I told my parents I was pursuing intelligence, the air in the house froze. What field, my father frowned. Intelligence. You mean sitting at a desk analyzing meaningless data? Strategic intelligence, Dad. I'll be trained in global threat analysis, cybersecurity, counterintelligence operations. Sounds like what people do when they don't have the guts to fight. I remember sitting up straight, trying not to show how much it hurt. My mother, as always, didn't intervene. She only said one thing as I left the dinner table. Maybe it's for the best. Women rarely make it in combat units. In my early training years, I didn't have time to dwell on their coldness. Intelligence isn't a desk job. I learned to read heat maps, decode signals, coordinate with special forces in the field, and sometimes go on site to assess threats myself. My first command was an intelligence gathering operation on a Middle Eastern border. No one in my family knew I was once surrounded in a semi-legal outpost where a single mistake could have meant execution. When I returned, no one asked where I'd been. They just said another conference in D.C. Right? I nodded. What was the point of telling the truth? For 15 years I lived as two people. One was Amelia, the quiet single sister who worked an office job in Washington, showing up at Thanksgiving with a store-bought pumpkin pie. The other was General Carter, who designed and ran Operation Shadow Vault, preventing a terrorist attack in Europe with just 4 days of satellite data analysis. The price of secrecy was invisibility. If you're reading this and have ever hidden part of your life from those you love, not to deceive, but because they wouldn't understand or worse would mock you, tell me how it feels. Leave a comment. I read them all. A few weeks ago, as I adjusted my dress uniform in my bedroom to prepare for Luke's ceremony, I caught my reflection in the mirror. General, woman, sister. The daughter my parents could never be proud of. All present in one quiet gaze. I once thought maybe doing well is enough. But as Luke's ceremony approached, I realized it wasn't recognition from superiors that haunted me. It was the enduring silence from my own family. Not a single question. Not a single word of praise. Not a single sign that I was anything but a shadow behind Luke. I knew I couldn't live like that forever. And what I never expected, the chance to break that silence, would come at Luke's ceremony. A celebration that seemed unrelated, but would become the moment when all masks fell. Some secrets keep us alive, but some truths, if never acknowledged, kill the truest parts of us. The hum of a drone buzzed like a bee in my ear as the screen displayed a real-time satellite map. On the pale sand, tiny red dots moved toward a convergence point where 12 American soldiers were hiding in the ruins of an abandoned civilian compound. I remember that moment clearer than my first star-pinning ceremony. A cramped command room in a nameless Middle Eastern base, sweat dripping down my collar. Every decision I made potentially ending those soldiers' lives in 15 minutes. Among them was Luke's unit. He didn't know I was there, and for years afterward he never knew. Most people think intelligence is all paperwork reports, Dry text printed on recycled paper. Partly true. But they don't understand behind every line of data, every signal, every source is a life, a decision, a razor's edge between survival and oblivion. I took my first command at 29 young for the role. By then, I'd had 7 years of training from data analysis to field work, from advanced survival courses to close-quarters combat response. I wasn't a trigger-pulling warrior, but I knew how to protect others with maps, information, and strategy. My first fully responsible operation, codenamed Cormorant 7, took place in a mountainous region near Syria's border. The mission: locate and destroy a rebel communications hub planning a suicide bombing in Amman. We had 36 hours to pinpoint the location, plan the strike, and extract safely. The Special Forces team we coordinated with was Delta 9. I was responsible for the entire action plan. I'd never trembled so much giving my first order. But when the hub exploded with no casualties, I understood the greatest weapon in war isn't a gun. It's the right information to the right person at the right time. I kept climbing the ranks. My family never knew where I was. I was required to share nothing beyond a vague job description, national security analysis. Every time I visited home, Luke would talk about his patrol's ambushes, the bravery of his comrades. I sat quietly listening to him describe missions I had in reality directed from behind the scenes. Once he said we were pinned at the border about to get ambushed, when we suddenly got orders to redirect, escaping by a hair. Still don't know who made that call. I just smiled and poured more coffee. It was me, but I could never say it. The hardest mission of my life was Shadow Vault, the operation that led to my early promotion to general 2 years ahead of schedule. It started like most intelligence operations: conflicting reports, blurry photos, anomalous satellite logs. But my gut told me something was wrong. I pushed for an expanded investigation, often delayed due to budget constraints. I persisted, and I was right. We uncovered a cross-border terrorist financing network hidden within a nonprofit education organization. It involved at least 3 countries, 4 insurgent groups, and posed a direct threat to a multinational military conference in Berlin. I led the 18-month counterintelligence operation, mobilizing over 200 personnel across 9 countries while maintaining absolute internal secrecy. One misstep, one leaked name could have meant execution for field agents. And we succeeded. No American soldiers died, no civilians were harmed. The financial network was dismantled. But Shadow Vault never made the news. Just one line in an internal report: mission success. Strategic recommendation, classified recognition pending. I remember one night after everyone had left, I stayed in the command center. Dim yellow lights, flickering screens. I stared at the map, recalling every decision, every agent's gaze over comms asking, "Are you sure, General Carter?" No one in my family knew who I was on nights like that. If you've ever succeeded without anyone knowing, if you've lived with recognition that comes from within, not from pats on the back or applause, leave a comment below. I know you understand the feeling. I don't share all this for pity. I share it because I know there are others like me quietly carrying burdens, quietly enduring, quietly triumphing without anyone noticing. And when my family prepared to attend Luke's ceremony at Fort Bragg, I still received an email from my mother as if I were an outsider. I almost didn't go. But then I got a call from Major General Langford's Shadow Vault has been declassified, and the Department of Defense has decided to honor you publicly on the same day as your brother's ceremony. I stayed silent for a long time on that call, not because I was happy, but because I was afraid. Not of being known, but of seeing the gap between me and my family wider than ever. Some silences don't require absolute quiet. They seep through laughter, weave into toasts, and linger in averted glances. I learned that at family gatherings. I vividly remember our last Thanksgiving together 2 years ago. The table was meticulously set by Mom as always, with turkey cranberry sauce and green bean casserole that Dad always praised. Everyone was there except me, arriving an hour late due to a delayed flight from Europe. No one asked why I was rushed. No one noticed I hadn't slept in 48 hours, wrapping up a negotiation with a security contact in Eastern Europe. "Amelia's here," Mom announced with a polite smile. "Always so busy." Then she turned to Stephanie, Luke's pregnant wife, expecting their second child. Our girl's so blessed with a great husband, good kids. She even made the school paper's front page for organizing a charity festival. I pulled out a chair, took a scoop of mashed potatoes, and stayed silent. The indifference in my family wasn't malicious, I understood that. It stemmed from a prejudice so deep it didn't need to be spoken. In that house, roles were pre-assigned, cemented over years. Dad was the hero Luke, the heir Mom, the devoted homemaker, and me, I was the one out of step. Early on, I tried to fit in. I shared what I could about training overseas assignments, omitting the classified parts, but the response was always the same, a polite nod, then a quick subject change. One year, I was invited to a NATO intelligence conference in Brussels, a high-level event where top European military strategists discussed coordinated emergency responses. I came home for Christmas foolishly hoping to share it. "What were you doing in Brussels?" Mom asked, still peeling potatoes. "A NATO conference. I was sent to represent the Regional Analysis Division." "Oh, like those career development seminars I used to attend when I was younger." Dad said nothing. Luke jumped in to talk about leading a drill in the rain, and all eyes turned to him. But the cruelest moment came at Dad's retirement ceremony. I received an urgent assignment in East Africa from the Pentagon just a week before. The timeline was too tight. I couldn't delegate. I was the only one with core data tracking a terrorist group's movements by the hour. I apologized to my family over the phone. Mom stayed silent. Dad said, "You're the only one not here. Even my old war buddies from Asia showed up." Luke called after the ceremony, unable to hide his frustration. "You knew how important this was. Dad gave his life to this country. When he needed you most, you disappeared." I stood in a steel container on the outskirts of Djibouti, holding a satellite phone, head pounding after 40 sleepless hours, heart twisting. I'd saved at least 30 civilians that morning by preempting a suicide bombing. But no one knew, and I couldn't say. "You're right," I said. "I'm sorry." Then I hung up, returning to the red dots on the screen, the desert map, and the wind howling through the antenna. I once thought that as I advanced, as I reached higher ranks, my family would understand. But the opposite happened. The further I went, the more they shut me out. They built a world I wasn't invited into, one of cozy dinners, full family photos, congratulations for Luke's promotions. I got Luke's wedding invitation via email, no formal invite, and when I couldn't make it, Mom sent one line. "Always a reason to be absent, isn't there? I know I'm not alone in this feeling. Many have been seen as different by their own families, just for choosing a path few understand. If you've been there, share below. You don't need details. Just one word: I understand. That's enough for me and others to feel less alone. I learned to live on the sidelines. I still came home for holidays, brought gifts tailored to each person, stayed quiet as Luke spoke, as if I weren't there. I helped Mom cook, sat through family photos without me, then left early with an excuse about urgent work. I stopped blaming them. No one can force others to see what's invisible to them. And love, I believe, is sometimes not absent, just limited by their definitions. But when the invitation to Luke's ceremony arrived with the cold line family should be present, no RSVP, no personal note, I realized I was still a shadow in their world. This time, though, that world was about to change. That morning, as I finished my coffee, my encrypted phone rang. Not my personal one. The phone used only for command communications, the one that ringing at dawn usually signaled something critical or urgent. I set the coffee down, went to my study, closed the door, and double-locked it. Then I answered. "General Carter." The voice on the other end was familiar. Deep, steady, not a syllable wasted. "Amelia." "It's Langford." "Good morning, Major General. You in D.C.?" "Yes, sir. Just got back last night." He paused briefly, then said slowly and clearly, "Operation Shadow Vault has been officially declassified." I froze as if I hadn't heard correctly. Langford continued, not giving me a chance to react. "The decision was finalized yesterday after a National Security Council meeting. Some parts remain classified, but your name will be made public. Your achievements, too." I exhaled silently. Shadow Vault, the operation that defined my career. The one that kept me sleepless for nearly a year, saved hundreds of lives, including agents who never saw my face. And the one that made me vanish from family life for 18 months. "Yes, sir. Understood. There's more," Langford said, his tone softening, the rare gentleness he used for surprising news. "The Department of Defense has decided to award you the Distinguished Service Cross." I nearly grabbed the desk for support. "Sir, really official. And," he paused, "the ceremony will be at Fort Bragg." Same day as your brother's captain, Luke Carter. My heart skipped a beat. An absolute paradox. A dual ceremony for two siblings serving the same country, but only one had ever been acknowledged. Langford seemed to read my thoughts. I know your family situation. I never told you. You didn't have to. I observe? He paused, then asked gently, almost human, do they know who you are yet? Amelia, I don't think so. And will you tell them I stared at the blank screen in front of me? In the reflection, I saw myself in cotton pajamas, hair, loosely tied eyes, still groggy but now sharpened by reality. Not yet, sir. Why not? I'm not sure they'll understand. Or want to. Langford didn't reply immediately. After a moment he said, You don't owe them that. But you owe yourself one moment in the light. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet room for a long time. The coffee had gone cold. The first rays of morning light slanted through the blinds, casting faint stripes on the carpet. I felt a weight lift from my chest. Lighter, but also exposed. For 15 years I'd accepted my role in the shadows. I didn't complain. I told myself doing right is enough. But now, given permission to step into the light, I felt afraid. Afraid the truth would fracture an already fragile bond. Afraid of Mom's gaze shifting from disappointment to suspicion. Afraid of Dad, who always believed only those who fought directly deserved to be called soldiers turning away silently. And above all, I was afraid of Luke. Afraid my brother would feel betrayed, humiliated, or worse, small. I stood and stepped onto the balcony. The city kept moving. Traffic lights blinked in the distance. Cars began lining up on the boulevard. Part of me thought, call them. Tell them beforehand. Give them time to prepare. It would hurt less, be less tense. But another voice, the one that had endured years of being dismissed, said, they deserve to see the truth in an unguarded moment. Just as I endured their unseeing gazes all my youth. I wasn't sure which was right. But I knew if you've been denied too long, when you're finally given a voice, you can't help but speak. That afternoon, I prepared my dress uniform. I checked every badge, every pin. I brushed the belt buckle clean, inspected the white gloves. I once thought I'd never wear this uniform in front of my family. Now, as it was about to happen, it didn't feel like excitement. It felt like peace. Because whether they understood or not approved, or not this time, I would be seen. Not as the sister with a desk job anymore, but as me. If you've ever had a part of your life you had to hide because you thought your loved ones wouldn't accept it, I hope you understand this feeling. And if you've ever wondered if I could speak out one day, should I share it? I want to know what you chose, and why. That evening I wrote a letter to Langford, not to confirm, but to thank him. Sir, thank you for giving me a chance I never dared dream of, not out of fear of failure, but fear of the light. Now, as the truth is allowed to emerge, I won't step back anymore. Respectfully, General Amelia Carter. I sealed the letter and placed it on the table. The next morning I'd deliver it personally to the Defense Department's main office, a silent but clear commitment I would be present. And I would no longer hide. They say a spotlight only shines on one person at a time. That morning in Fort Bragg's main auditorium, that light shone entirely on my brother Luke. I sat quietly in the VIP section, not far from the stage, but completely separate from my family. My dress uniform with its rank concealed under a coat, as agreed with General Langford. I was a shadow hiding in plain sight, moments from being seen. Here's my opening hook for those who've felt forgotten in their own families. Have you ever been present in someone's life, yet they acted as if you were invisible? Share in the comments, because that feeling, trust me, is one of the deepest forms of loneliness. The room filled with soldiers of all ranks, friends, family, and officials from various agencies. On stage, the silver star emblem gleamed under the lights. I glanced at the family-seating Dad in his old uniform eyes, proud as he watched Luke chat with comrades. Mom beamed, and Luke's wife sat beside him holding his hand tenderly. I once again wasn't on the honored family guest list. I was used to it. I'm the one who saves people who never know they were in danger. As the medal ceremony began, the room stood and applauded. Luke's name was announced solemnly, Captain Luke Carter for heroic actions in Operation Granite Peak, leading his unit to save 12 civilians under direct fire with no losses. I knew about that operation, one of the hotspots where my intelligence provided pinpoint-accurate data. I'd sat in the coordination room for 2 sleepless days, constantly monitoring UAV signals and issuing early warnings to Luke's unit. I kept them safe. I kept my brother alive. And now I sat below, listening to him give thanks. I thank my commander, my comrades, my brothers who stood by me in the line of fire. I thank my father, Colonel Carter, who taught me about honor. I thank my mother who kept the family hearth warm during the months I was away. I thank my wonderful wife, Emily, who believed in me even when I couldn't say where I was. He stopped. That was all. Not a word for me. Not a nod to the sister who once wiped his nose as a kid. Or more accurately, who commanded the intelligence unit that kept his battalion from an ambush. I don't know why I still expected something. Maybe a part of me was still the Carter family daughter waiting for a sign I existed in their story. As the room stood again to applaud Luke, I didn't stand. Not out of envy, I was truly proud of him, but because of a quiet realization I knew better than anyone that his achievement wasn't his alone. I recalled Major General Langford's words from days before. This is the moment the world and your family will see you. But I wondered, would they really see me? Or just the title of general still blind to the woman who fought silently for 15 years? An officer passing the VIP section saw me and nodded respectfully. A small gesture, but I cherished it. Those who understand always do. After Luke's speech came a symbolic title transfer. I saw Dad take the stage, placing a heavy hand on his son's shoulder, eyes glowing. Mom waved, tears in her eyes. My family looked like a perfectly framed photo, and I, a shadow that didn't fit the frame. Dear friend, if you've ever been the one quietly contributing behind the scenes with no one knowing, share your story in the comments. Not for glory, but to know we're not alone. The ceremony ended. People moved to the reception area. I stayed seated for a while, took a deep breath. Tomorrow I'd step onto that stage, and the light wouldn't shine only on Luke anymore. But before that, part of me was still afraid. Not of fame, I'd faced death. What scared me was my mother's stunned gaze, my father's hoarse voice realizing the shadow they overlooked was a general. Tomorrow would be the day I'd be seen. But I wasn't sure I was ready for them to see the real me, the one they'd ignored for over a decade. I'd imagined countless times what it would feel like to have my name called in a room full of ranks medals and respectful gazes. But I never thought it would happen at my brother's ceremony. That morning, Fort Bragg's auditorium was solemn to the point of coldness. I wore my dress uniform, every medal polished to perfection, no longer hiding my rank or my true self for the first time in 15 years. I was seated in the VIP row across from the family section, an unusual spot for someone whose family didn't even invite them. I didn't see them look my way. They were busy taking photos with Luke, congratulating him with bright smiles and pride. I didn't blame them. How could they imagine their quiet daughter sitting among the Army's top generals, wearing prestigious medals with a calm gaze and a spine forged over a decade? Luke's Silver Star ceremony proceeded with full protocol. My brother stepped onto the stage to applause. I clapped too, not out of courtesy, but because I knew Luke deserved it. He'd fulfilled his duty to his unit, his comrades, and himself. But in my heart, there was an empty space when in his thank you speech he mentioned everyone, except me. As the applause for Luke's ceremony faded, a brief hush fell as if to let everyone breathe. I knew what was coming. In my chest, a drumbeat began. Major General Langford stepped to the podium. His voice was deep and resonant, pulling the room into its most solemn state. Before we conclude today's ceremony, I have a special duty entrusted by the Chief of Staff. Today we honor a warrior who served silently in the background, but it's people like her who shift the tides of battle. I heard chairs shift, whispers spread. Eyes turned to Langford, some glancing at me, but no one was certain yet. I sat still. My breathing slowed. Every sense sharpened as if awaiting a signal to fire. By special declassification order from the Department of Defense today, we publicly acknowledge Operation Shadow Vault, a multinational intelligence operation that neutralized a transnational terrorist network, saving thousands of lives. I saw my mother turn her head. Dad squinted, leaning slightly forward. Langford looked directly at me. His voice was firm. The commander of that operation, who personally coordinated on site and was promoted to general before age 40, is General Amelia Carter. I stood. The room fell silent for half a second before erupting like a shockwave. Those I'd commanded from 3-star generals to special forces leaders stood clapping. I saw eyes shift from surprise to respect, from doubt to admiration. My family, they froze. Luke sat stunned. His mouth opened-closed, then opened again. Then a voice rang out loud, clear and piercing my chest like a blunt blade. "Who is she?" It was Luke. My brother. Verbatim. The entire room heard. I held my stance, walking toward the stage. Eyes of envy, shock, pride, and shame intertwined. But my gaze fixed on one corner where Dad looked at me like I was a stranger. Mom, hand on her chest, eyes welling up. Langford handed me the medal case. On it, an eagle spread its wings like I was doing now, breaking free from the shadow I'd been confined to for 15 years. "General Carter, on behalf of the President and the Department of Defense, I am honored to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross for your unparalleled contributions to Operation Shadow Vault." I bowed to receive the medal, then stepped to the podium. No paper, no notes, because this speech had been written in my heart for a decade. I know today's surprise. I've lived and worked in silence for nearly 15 years. I served not to be known, but because I believe in the survival of every life we protect. Perhaps that's why I'm here, not for recognition, but because it's time the truth was respected. I looked straight at Luke. He was still frozen. My family, if they're confused, I understand. Because throughout my journey they didn't know who I was. And perhaps I never gave them the chance to know. I paused. I hadn't planned to end like that, but my heart urged me it was time to open a door. But today I stand here not just as a general, but as a daughter, a sister, a woman. And I hope after today we'll have a chance to meet again, not in misunderstanding, but in truth. The room stood. This time Dad slowly rose. Mom wiped her tears. Luke still didn't stand. I left the stage to unending applause. As I stepped down the final stair, I heard Langford's familiar whisper, "General Carter, you just made an entire army fall silent to hear a heart. Not everyone can do that." I nodded, but in my heart, every beat echoed. Finally, they know. If you've ever been underestimated, had your abilities dismissed because of your choices, share in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one who's had to rise from belittling gazes. I left the auditorium knowing behind me the family door had cracked open. But stepping through it wouldn't be easy. I'd never seen Dad stand still for so long. Not before an honor guard, not during a drill, not even in the old photos lining our walls, where he always stood, tall, chin-proud eyes unwavering. But that day on Fort Bragg stage among hundreds of officers and guests, my father, Colonel William Carter, couldn't hide the earthquake shaking within him. I stood there in a perfectly pressed uniform, the freshly pinned medal gleaming on my chest. My eyes met his, and for a moment I saw it shattering. "Who is she?" Luke had exclaimed minutes earlier. My brother's question was like an arrow hitting the truth our family wasn't ready to face. Who am I? I'm the daughter they always thought should take an easier path. The girl Mom said should settle down, marry, have kids, go to the market every Saturday, bake for holidays. The one Dad called educated logistics, and the one who just stepped out of the shadows with a general's rank and an untold achievement. Dad clutched his speech paper tightly. I saw his knuckles whiten. Mom sat below, face pale. Luke bowed his head, whether from embarrassment or his own hurt, I couldn't tell. Major General Langford stood at the stage's edge watching. He nodded slightly to Dad, signaling readiness if he wanted to speak. And unexpectedly, Dad stepped forward. No fanfare, no drums. Just a silence that hung in the air. He turned to the audience, then back to me. His eyes now not those of an officer, but a father. "I'm sorry, Amelia." The room went still. I was proud of my son for being a brave soldier. But today, I realize I was wrong. Wrong for not seeing clearly, not enough. I underestimated my daughter. He stepped closer, eyes locked on mine. I heard his boots on the stage floor each step, like the pulse of a heart held back. "Amelia, I didn't see your true strength. I let old prejudices blind me. You're not just a general, but a daughter who makes me immensely proud. I'm sorry." His voice trembled on the last words. And then the unthinkable happened. He opened his arms and hugged me. For the first time in years, he embraced me before hundreds of eyes. A real hug, unrestrained, without pride. I don't know how long I stood in his arms, only that my chest pressed against his decorated uniform, once celebrated, now pressed against mine, the daughter he'd seen as a bystander. Below, Mom cried. Tears streamed uncontrollably. She covered her mouth with a handkerchief, trying to stifle sobs, but her gaze held regret and sorrow. Luke didn't look up, but I saw his hand grip the chair tightly. The next chapter would be his, I knew. But this moment was between me and the father who once believed only those with guns deserved to be soldiers. Applause roared like a wave through the auditorium. It wasn't just for me, but for something rare, the courage of a father to bow before his daughter. I wondered how many fathers have learned to apologize to their children, how many children dream of hearing I was wrong. If you're reading this and have lived in silence, longing for acknowledgement, share your story. Because forgiveness often begins with a hug and a simple apology. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, I lingered. Mom approached, still holding her handkerchief, eyes no longer red, but still teary. "You've endured more than I ever imagined, Amelia," she said. "I was wrong to always want you to be someone else. From now on, I'll learn to be the mother of you as you are." I didn't speak. I just nodded. And we hugged. She trembled in my arms, not from cold, but because for the first time she saw me not as the eccentric daughter who chose intelligence, but as the resilient woman she'd never understood. I knew wounds don't heal in a day, but the truth was out, and now at least someone was willing to own it. Langford approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You changed a family, General Carter," he said softly. "Maybe even a generation's perspective." I smiled faintly. I just said what needed to be heard long ago. He nodded and walked away. In my hand the metal grew heavier, not from its metal, but because it now carried my parents' gazes. Then I saw Luke standing alone a few steps away. His eyes were red, but his head was high. He walked toward me no longer arrogant or cold. "Got a minute?" he asked quietly. I nodded, and we stepped outside. There I was about to hear something I never thought would come from the brother I'd saved without ever being thanked. Until now. I'd read hundreds, if not thousands, of transfer requests in my career, but never had I paused so long staring at a standard printed form, neat handwriting, and felt my hands tremble. Sender Captain Luke Carter. Requested Unit Strategic Analysis Command, Eastern Tactical Intelligence Division. Signature clear firm. But the reason in the middle gripped my heart to learn from the commander I once underestimated. 3 weeks after the ceremony, everything had returned to normal, or at least it seemed so on the surface. I was back in my intelligence office, a place no family member had ever visited. My team worked with near emotionless precision as we were trained. Information never sleeps. National security never pauses. But inside I wasn't okay. Dad's speech, Mom's teary eyes, the hug before hundreds of soldiers, they lingered in my memory. That feeling being seen, acknowledged, was too unfamiliar to get used to. Then an internal envelope landed on my desk. No sender's name, but I recognized the handwriting on the outside. Luke. I opened the form with both hands, careful as if disarming an emotional bomb, and it did explode in my chest. I didn't know what I expected more, a late apology, a vague email, or even a cold nod. But I never imagined my brother, who'd spent our youth dismissing my work, would request a transfer to my unit. The reason was painfully concise: to learn from the commander I once underestimated. I folded the form, opened it, folded it again, as if I couldn't believe what I'd read. At the bottom was a handwritten note. If rejected, I understand. But at least know I meant it. I sat motionless for nearly 10 minutes. Eyes fixed on the blank wall behind my desk, where I usually hung mission schematics. Today, there were none, just empty space, like the chance Luke was giving me to redraw the map of our relationship. I knew I could easily approve it. One signature, and Luke would enter my world. The world he once thought was just reading reports and clicking a mouse. But I also knew better than anyone Luke wasn't ready. Intelligence isn't like the battlefield out there. It's silent, subtle, without explosions or bloodshed to prove courage. It demands a different kind of bravery silence, patience, and readiness to go unnoticed even when you've saved an entire unit. And I wasn't sure as superior and subordinate we'd be mature enough to leave behind the emotional baggage of our past. So I sat down and wrote a letter by hand. Not because I couldn't text or to be dramatic. Some words need to be written in real ink by a real hand, so the recipient feels every thought within. Dear Luke, you surprised me, truly. That request, simple, direct, is perhaps the bravest thing I've ever seen from you. But I won't approve it. Not because I don't trust you, not because I'm still angry, but because you don't need to prove anything to me. From the day you joined the army, I always believed you were a good soldier, even when you didn't believe that about me. And though I once craved your acknowledgement, the only thing that matters now is we understand each other. Truly. Without masks of pride or rank. If you really want to know my world, I'm always ready to share as your sister, not your superior. But you don't need to step into the shadows to see the light in them. Stay in your role and do it as well as you always have. Proud to be your sister Amelia. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an internal envelope, and wrote 3 words on it to Luke Carter. Nothing more. I never thought I'd sit in my own office refusing a chance to be closer to my brother out of love for him. But it felt right. A week later I received a note from Luke. Not a form, just a small scrap of paper torn from a training manual written in pencil. Read your letter. Understood. Thank you, sis. I'll do well in my role because you showed me the true value of a soldier lies not in where they stand, but how they serve. I smiled reading it. Not a hug, not a handshake, but a beginning. A door opened for the first time after years of coldness and distance. Have you ever received an apology, not in words, but in a truly moving action? Or has someone surprised you in a way you never imagined? Share your story in the comments. I believe sometimes the most meaningful connections are rebuilt from the simplest acts. That evening I left the office later than usual. A light rain fell, but my heart felt warm. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking home alone. Family isn't always right, but if they're willing to learn from each other, there's still hope. I'd written hundreds of classified reports, drafted strategies that could shift battlefields, but never had a pen felt so heavy as when writing that letter to Luke. No header, no orders, no codes, just the sincerest words from a sister to the brother who'd hurt me most, and whom I always loved. 3 weeks after the Fort Bragg ceremony, in a quiet weekend afternoon at the base, Luke Carter opened his personal mailbox. Among the mundane memos was a plain white envelope, no seal, no address. Just 2 words on it. To Luke. Inside was a handwritten letter in familiar handwriting he'd seen on old Christmas cards, long since stopped being exchanged. He sat on the edge of his bed, removed his cap, set it aside, then opened the letter. Luke, you don't know how much I hesitated before writing these lines. But when I read your transfer request, with the reason to learn from the commander, I once underestimated, I cried. Not because of your regret, but because of your growth. And because I saw you, truly saw you for the first time in years. Luke, you don't owe me anything. You don't need to prove yourself or fix the past. I'm not writing to reject your request, but to say you've always been a proud soldier, a brother I never stopped loving even when our silence felt as vast as an ocean. I was once a shadow in your eyes, but you were never a thorn in my heart. You don't need to serve under me to make amends. Just live true to yourself, and if one day you want to sit down, have dinner as 2 adults, no ranks, no titles, I'll always be ready. Forever your sister Amelia. Luke folded the letter slowly. Not because he wanted to hold on to it longer, but because his hands were shaking. He rested his elbows on his knees, head bowed, chest tight. His eyes, used to battlefield dust, stung with something bullets couldn't erode unspoken forgiveness. I didn't know if Luke had read the letter, but that night he called. Not a text, not an email. A real call at 10:17 p.m. When I answered, the other end held a familiar, long I read your letter. I stayed silent, waiting, not pushing. I don't know what to say. Never knew feeling both ashamed and relieved could be like this. I didn't know I could write like that either, I said, with a small laugh. It's been a while since I wrote from the heart. I was wrong too many times. You know, I thought if I transferred to your unit served under you, I could balance something out. Luke, I gently interrupted, I don't need you to fix the past. I just need you to see yourself as a grown man willing to face and learn. Silence. Then he whispered, "Thank you for never hating me." I didn't reply right away. I wanted him to feel it as a quiet truth, no proof needed. The next morning I received an internal email from Command Captain Luke Carter's transfer request has been withdrawn per personal request. I smiled reading it. Not because Luke gave up, but because my brother understood redemption isn't about following someone else's path, but having the courage to walk alongside unafraid of comparison. I printed my letter and stored it in a drawer alongside photos with my old team from Shadow Vault. Outside my window, winter crept in the breeze, brushing the curtain like a reminder that a new season was coming, not just in weather but in my heart. Dear friend, has a loved one ever misunderstood your path, then realized and made amends? Did you forgive right away, or need timeshare? In the comments, I believe every story deserves to be heard. That evening, as I sat alone on my balcony, I got a text from Luke. "Mom and Dad want you over for dinner this weekend. What do you think?" I looked at the night sky where stars began to twinkle. How long had it been since I sat with family without feeling like an outsider? I typed back quickly. "Tell them to make the BBQ ribs I like. I'll bring dessert. Deal." One word, but to me, a beginning. And Luke, what's his shave mom will check. If anything proves time can heal, nothing shows it clearer than the change on the Carter family living room wall. 6 months after the Fort Bragg ceremony, I returned to the house I grew up in, stepped through the familiar door, and stood still before the famous wall where Dad hung his commendations medals and military photos of him and Luke. Now the right corner held a large glass frame with a photo of me at my general's ceremony standing beside Langford. Below it was a replica of the Distinguished Service Cross, neatly framed. Next to it, my intelligence unit's insignia, small but dignified, and at the bottom a bronze plaque, General Amelia Carter, our daughter. No intelligence, no high rank, no declassified. Just a simple title I never thought would appear in this house, our daughter. The first family dinner in years without me missing took place as Luke promised. Mom made BBQ ribs as always, but this time with my dessert cinnamon almond cake, which she once called too fancy for family meals. We sat together for the first time without awkwardness. Mom asked about my work, not probing, but with respect. "Still can't say much, can you?" I smiled, nodded. Still the same Mom. "But don't worry, what I do now isn't something I hide out of shame." Dad just smiled faintly. He spoke less than before, but I saw he was learning to listen. When Luke shared unit stories, Dad leaned in, asking details. When I mentioned a 3-month trip to Germany for a European security program, he nodded with acknowledgement, no longer brushing me off or changing the subject. The strangest thing was the biggest change wasn't in what they said, but in the silences that were no longer heavy. No one flinched when I mentioned my time in Syria. No one changed the topic when I brought up Shadow Vault. Instead, Mom asked, "Were you ever hurt?" I hesitated, then said, "Once." But minor. My team handled it quickly. Mom didn't cry. She just held my hand under the table. After dinner, Luke went to the backyard. I followed, carrying 2 glasses of water. Still stargazing, I asked, handing him a glass. "And you still sneaking up like a ghost," Luke laughed. "As a kid, you always startled me popping up behind me." We laughed together. For the first time, it felt unforced. Luke set his glass on the old wooden table, sitting down. "Yesterday, I told my platoon about you," he said. I turned. "Really? Yeah. Really. About how you saved my unit without me knowing. About how you lived silently for 15 years. About how you didn't need anyone's recognition, but still saved us all." I looked at the sky. The stars twinkled fewer than before due to light pollution, but still there. One new guy asked, "So who's your sister?" Luke continued, lips curling slightly. "What did you say?" I said. "My sister is someone it took me too many years to truly see, and now I don't want to waste another day." His answer made me look at Luke for a long time. Nothing more to say. We clinked glasses, a small, simple ritual, as if touching the final truth we'd become part of each other. Dear friend, if you've ever felt distant from those closest to you, then one day we're pulled back, share your story. Sometimes a simple question like, how are you today, can start the healing. As I left that night, Mom saw me off. She didn't say much, just pressed a box of leftover almond cake into my hands. For your soldiers to try. Tell them your mom made it. I nodded, hugged her. No more words needed. Dad stood at the door. As I passed, he said, "Be safe, and if you need anything, call. Anytime." I knew need wasn't just about military matters. It meant if I needed a home, a father, a place to return to, I could come back anytime. That night, I looked at the letter I'd written to Luke, folded it, placed it in my keepsake box. Inside was something new, a photo of our family taken after dinner. The first photo with me in the center, not on the edge. Maybe some think a story like mine ends with a grand ceremony, a TV appearance, or another medal pinned to my chest. But no, the ending isn't in an auditorium or barracks. It's in a cozy kitchen during a simple family meal, with soft yellow light bathing familiar faces. We sat around the table. Mom still wore her apron hair, neatly tied hands smelling of fried onions. Dad wore a plain shirt, no insignia, no trace of the Colonel William Carter of old. Luke wore a unit t-shirt. I did too, no uniform, no rank, just a woman in an earth-toned cardigan. "How was your Europe trip?" Mom asked, pouring juice into my glass. "Good," I said. Nothing flashy, but the results were worth being proud of. Dad nodded, not pressing further. He'd learned that not all value lies in what can be spoken or measured. Some achievements demand respect through silence. Mom brought out traditional roast with bread and salad. When everyone had their share, Luke stood raising his glass of water. "I think, today, we should toast." All eyes turned to him, including mine. Not for a medal or a rank, but to celebrate our tradition of serving the nation in every form, whether on the battlefield or behind the curtain. And above all, serving with heart. I looked at Luke, my throat tightening. Dad raised his glass. Mom smiled. I joined them. As the 4 glasses clinked, I felt that small sound echo something far greater. A family, after years of misunderstanding, had finally learned to understand and value each other. After dinner, Luke and I sat on the porch. Early spring, cool air, the moon peeking through the trees. "Remember when we learned archery at summer camp?" Luke asked. I hit the bullseye. "You kept sticking arrows in the grass," I said with a light laugh. "And they called you the weird tomboy. Remember?" I nodded. That's when I started realizing I'd always be different. Luke rested his chin, thoughtful. "I used to think you chose a tough path to prove something. Now I know you chose it because it's where you belong." I looked at the moon, paused, then turned to him. "Because you all underestimated me, I learned to value myself from within. And I'm grateful for that." Luke looked surprised. Grateful, I nodded. If I'd been coddled, I might not have gone this far. I wouldn't have forged that quiet strength. I wouldn't have learned to do right without needing recognition. Silence. Then Luke said, "You're the strongest person I know. But I also hope you won't need to be that strong anymore." I smiled faintly, my heart warming. Maybe next time I'll let myself be a little weaker. Give someone a chance to stand beside me. "You'll do it," Luke said. "Because now you don't have to fight to exist among people who don't understand you anymore." Dear friend, have you ever realized your true worth not when praised, but when you no longer needed recognition? When family started truly listening, what changed in your heart? Share, it might be a small light for someone still struggling in silence. That night, I wrote in my journal. The first line was, "Family is where you don't need to shout to be seen." That journey from the daughter denied at the base gate to the general called out in the auditorium wasn't just a career path. It was a journey back to myself and, most importantly, finding my true place among those I love. I once thought I was an outsider, but now I know I was never outside. I was just walking a path they couldn't see clearly. And now, with the light spread, my family has chosen to walk with me in their own steps. The story doesn't end with a medal. It ends with a gentle nod, a long hug, a hand held under the table, and begins again with a meal, a look, a genuine question. My family finally became a place where everyone is seen. My story isn't just a general's journey, it's the journey of anyone misjudged who fought to be recognized and ultimately learned to stand firm in their true worth. I spent years learning that the most precious recognition doesn't come from medals or titles, but from listening eyes, unconditional hugs, and a family choosing to walk with you even if they once didn't understand. Families aren't perfect, but they can grow. And we, if forgiving enough, can bridge gaps that seemed impossible. If you see yourself in this story, whether as someone quietly contributing or learning to love, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your story. And if this journey touched your heart, follow the channel to explore more pieces of emotion about family identity and truth. Thank you for staying with me until the end. This isn't an end, but a new beginning.